In 2021, of October 2021, in Philadelphia, there in the transit system, there was an assault that took place. A young woman entered the subway and a man approached her, a stranger approached her and ended up assaulting her, sexually assaulting her. And this went on. She pushed him away, but this went on for close to 40 minutes. The horrible thing about it is the fact that there were people there watching it, and they did nothing about it. They recorded the incident. There was over 10 people there that recorded it, but no one called 911. No one contacted, no one stood there and tried to stop what was taking place. Close to 40 minutes. And you sit there and you think, how can that happen? Well, some people, they call it the bystander effect. And what it is some, obviously, yes, it may be out of fear. They don't want to get hurt by trying to stand up for somebody else. But a lot of times it's really the fact that if a group of people are not willing to do anything, you're not going to be the first one to step out. They're waiting for one person to step, and maybe they'll go. And not a single person did anything to help this woman in the 38, close to 40 minutes that attack took place. It is horrible, but this kind of thing happens, and it happens quite regularly. And again, they do call it that. The fact is, I don't care whether you call it bystander effect or the fact is, it's just cowardice really is what it is. And you're living in a day and age where morality and ethics has been thrown out the window. Well, this is nothing new. When you go in Genesis in chapter 6, you read here in verse 6, it says, or in verse 5, and God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Now you let that sink in. The fact is that in given time, over time, wickedness was so great on this earth, it was rampant. But not just that, but the reality that every thought, every intent of human thinking was just evil. Whatever thought it is, it was always something that tended towards wickedness. And God saw this. It says that it repented the Lord. Now, when you read this, it is not, when you have to be careful in some of the wording. Sometimes when the scriptures will talk about God repented of the evil, and you almost think of it like, I shouldn't have done this, and I'm repenting of, we look at almost sometimes in this term of repenting of sins. That's not what it means here. It is that God regretted what he did, but it grieved his heart. And oftentimes when you read passages where God repents of the evil that he was going to do, it just simply means that he changed his mind. Now, it says, it repented the Lord, that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. Deep within it grieved him. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I've created from the face of the earth, both man and beast and creeping thing and the things and the fowls of the air, for it repents me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Noah found grace. And again, the wording here, it means that he found favor in God's eyes. All we see is one here that is given that says that he found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And these are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. Now, that doesn't mean that we know Noah wasn't perfect. The word there, again, that old English term, it doesn't just mean that he had complete perfection. He never sinned in his life. The fact is he was faithful in worshiping the Lord. And that he was a man of integrity. The idea of this perfect is that it entails this life of character and integrity. The fact that he was a just man. And notice in the latter part, this is what it all boils down to. Noah walked with God. That is the main thing, that he walked with the Lord. No one else was doing that. In all of creation, we see that only Noah was walking faithfully with the Lord. And of course, we know that in this you have recorded the flood and Noah building the ark. And during that time, Noah built the ark over 100 years, and that God tells him to build the ark and tells him to be prepared because a great flood was going to come. And during that time, Peter says that Noah was a preacher of righteousness. So he's actually not just building the ark, but he's witnessing to people, letting them know, hey, a flood is coming. But again, so much wickedness and corruption, people would not believe. People would not concern themselves. And it's the same Peter talks about. There were some that during the flood, they thought, oh, nothing like this is ever going to happen. Nothing like this. The end's not going to come. They didn't believe it. But again, we do see the testimony here of Noah. Noah had a faithful walk in his life. And I think to myself, if I lived at that time, would it be similar? Would I find favor, grace in the eyes of the Lord? What kind of example, what kind of life would I be living? And would it be that there would be a remnant left? Because Noah and his family were able to be in the ark, and they took creatures with them. And by the way, there are flood stories in the Sumerian text. There's flood stories in other places that talk about it. In China, they have a flood story as well. And so it's very interesting when you begin to research and you find that certain regions had their own, in a sense, the flood impacted, and they talked about the flood. It wasn't the degree that we find here in the scriptures, but they knew and understood there was a global flood. There was a catastrophe that took place. So then we have to ask ourselves, when we look at the life of Noah, would we find favor and grace? Would we also be included with all those that ended up being destroyed? And then I want you to turn with me to Exodus. We're going to be in Exodus 32. Exodus 32. We know that Noah, he wasn't perfect. He made mistakes. And there, even just after the flood waters had dispersed, you'll find some of the mistakes that he had made. But he still was faithful in walking with the Lord and seeking to follow God in righteousness. But we notice here in Exodus 32 about another individual, very well known, Moses. Moses had been on Mount Sinai speaking with God, and God had given him the 10 Commandments. Moses had been there a while, and of course, the Israelites who were waiting began to think that Moses died. And they said to Aaron, they said, you need to make us an idol. We don't need to worry about Moses anymore. We don't know what's come of him. We want to have an idol just like the other nations. Make us a golden calf. And Aaron, in his folly, did this. Aaron, it seems that he also was angry with the people, but he said, fine, I'll give you an idol. You want an idol? And he made a golden calf. And of course, the Israelites began to worship, and they began to live in wickedness, and they began to have so much sin amongst each other. And basically, the things that they saw other nations do, they were supposed to be a light and a testimony for those nations, but they're doing things even worse oftentimes now. Moses is there on the mount, and he's speaking with God. And it says here in verse 6, they rose up early on the morrow, and they offered burnt offerings, and they brought peace offerings, and the people sat down to eat and to drink, and they rose up to play. Now that is, the term here is that the people created so much lewdness and rioting. They were partying, but this isn't just simply just having a fun time and playing hide and seek. This is the wickedness and corruption that has taken place within the camp. And you see in verse 7, the Lord said to Moses, get down, go down from the mount. For your people, which you brought out of the land of Egypt, has corrupted themselves. Now God is at a place where he's saying, I don't want anything to do with them anymore. He says, your people, you brought them out. They've turned aside quickly out of the way which I commanded them. God said, I gave the commands. And here I'm giving you the 10 commandments for them to live by. And they have broken every single one in this moment. They've turned away. They have made them a molten calf, and they've worshipped it, and sacrificed thereunto, and said, These be thy gods, O Israel, which brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And the Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. They are hardened in their hearts. They will not listen. They are rebellious. Now, therefore, leave me alone, that my wrath may wax hot against them. God says, I'm angry. Leave me be. I'm going to destroy them. But what does Moses do? Moses begs in verse 11. He beseeches the Lord his God and said, Lord, why are you so angry? Why does your wrath wax hot against your people, which you brought out of the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand? He said, God, if you kill them, the Egyptians are going to say, well, what was it all for in the first place? The nations are going to laugh. It's going to be a mockery. People saw your greatness when you led the children of Israel through the Red Sea, and they saw the plagues that you had done and the testimony here. And now if you kill them, what would happen? Now here's the thing. God knew what Moses was going to do. But Moses, he could have. I believe that Moses had the choice and the capacity to say, go ahead and kill them, God. I'm sick of them too. And then here's the question for you and for me. What would you do? Would you find favor as Noah? And then if you are in this position with Moses where right when you go through the Red Sea, you didn't even want to lead the people. If you remember, Moses didn't want to lead them. He was scared. He was worried. He was concerned. God said, I'll be with you. And if you're really that worried about how you speak, then take Aaron. Let Aaron be your mouthpiece. But Moses, then they go through the Red Sea, and then 3 days later, it's not long, they begin to say, well, we're thirsty, we're hungry, we're tired, God just brought us out here to kill us. God doesn't care about us. Complaining over and over and over and over. I'm telling you, if I was Moses, I'd say, yeah, it's about time, Lord, about time. Send fire down. Consume them. But Moses, he had the opportunity. What does he do? He intercedes. He prays to God for the people. And he says, God, don't do this. And here's the thing. God, it says in verse 14, the Lord repented of the evil. All that means is God changed his mind. Why? Moses prayed. He interceded on behalf of the people. Do you think the Israelites knew that, by the way? That they were that close to being killed, wiped off entirely? God told Moses, said, I can make another nation. Notice as we go on, Moses does go. He is so angry at what he sees the people doing when he gets to the camp. He throws the tablets, he breaks it, and then he breaks the calf, beats it down, and puts it in water. He makes the people drink of that water, says, that's your idol here. But still Moses, still in all of this, we look in verse 31. Moses returned unto the Lord and said, this people have sinned a great sin, and they've made them gods of gold. Yet now, if you will forgive their sin, and if you won't forgive their sin, God, blot me. God, if it takes you taking my name out of your book of life, and that I'm destined for condemnation, judgment, eternal judgment, then God do it. Well, Moses is a very powerful intercessor. To actually come to the point where you say, not only that Moses said, God, I pray you don't kill him. Now I think about Abraham when God was going to kill or was going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah for their wickedness. What did Abraham do? Oh, yeah, get them, God. I've been praying for their destruction for long. That's a corrupt city there. There's a terrible people. Those are horrible. They deserve it. They deserve it. No, Abraham did what? He said, God, what if there's 100 righteous? Would you destroy it? No, I won't. What if you just hear me? What if there's 50? Would you just, no. Okay, listen, what if there's 20? What if there's 10? You see, he's interceding and seeking. God says, if there's that, I won't destroy it. The sad reality, there wasn't even 10 righteous in the city. But you do see here an example with Moses, with Abraham. We look with Noah as well. The example that Noah had faithfully walked with God even when no one else would. Even when the crowd, all of them, were going away from God, Noah walked faithfully with the Lord. And then we have Moses here that at any time he could have said, just wipe them out, I'm done. But he intercedes. And so then the question for us as well, are we willing to intercede for America? Are we willing to intercede for our community? Are we willing to intercede for our family, our friends? Are we willing to intercede? And I simply just mean that you're praying for them and their lives. And that, yes, to you, it may deserve destruction. But the fact is that still there's a call that we offer them up to the Lord and say, God, I pray, Lord, would you forgive? Lord, I pray that they would get right. And Moses was willing even to say, God, take my name out of your book. Give me the punishment that they're going to face. And God said, he said to Moses, whosoever has sinned against me, him I will blot out of the book. God says, no. It's the one who sins against me, their name is going to be blotted out. Well, now I want you to take your Bibles and turn with me here to Numbers 24 or Numbers 25. In Numbers 25, by the way, how often have we wept over the wickedness in this world, over the wickedness in this country? Does it impact us? Does it do anything? Do we have any concern? My little girl convicts me so much because I've seen her several times just crying. And I ask her why, and she says, why do people not follow God? Why do people not love God? And it breaks her heart. And I look and I think, Lord, how few of times have I cried over this wickedness, the sinfulness. Well, we see Moses was a willing intercessor. Noah was faithful in his walk with the Lord. Even when no one else would follow, he was faithful. And then we see another individual, not long, several years has gone by with the Israelites. And they have been wandering the wilderness. They will be wandering in this area in Kadesh Barnea for about 38 years. And the backdrop of this here is that when you read in Numbers 22, you'll read about a man named Balaam. Balaam was commissioned by Balak. Balaam was supposed to be a prophet of the Lord. He was, but the reality was that he was corrupt because he wanted money, and he loved money, and Balak offered him possessions, fame, wealth, if he would curse the children of Israel. Well, Balaam tried eventually to do that, but he couldn't. God wouldn't allow him. In fact, Balaam actually pronounced 3 blessings on Israel. And one of them was a prophetic message of the Messiah, of Jesus Christ. But Balaam eventually tells Balak, listen, I know a way that we can get at the Israelites. All you've got to do is turn their hearts away from God, and you let your Moabite women into the community, and they marry them. They'll turn their hearts away from God. They'll worship idolatry. If you just corrupt the Israelites in their hearts, God will get angry with them anyway, and they'll be cursed. So that's the backdrop. Aaron has just died. The priest has died not long before this. Miriam died before this. So you have Moses, who is quite old now. And what we notice here in Numbers 25 in verse 1. And Israel abode in Shittim, and the people begun to commit whoredom. They began to commit adultery and sinful acts, fornication, with the daughters of Moab. And they called the people unto the sacrifices of their gods. And the people did eat, and they bowed down to their gods. And Israel joined himself unto Baal Peor, that is Baal, the idol Baal. They began to worship Baal. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel. And the Lord said to Moses, take all the heads of the people, hang them before the Lord against the sun, that the fierce anger of the Lord may be turned away. Those committing, the chiefs of the people that were allowing these things to happen. And so there was a great slaughter that took place at this time. There was corruption that was going on. People were living in wickedness. And it says in verse 6, behold, one of the children of Israel came and brought unto his brethren a Midianitish woman in the sight of Moses. I mean, he is so bold in his sinful wickedness. And he's chasing after this woman, and he brings, she gets there in the sight of Moses, and in the sight of all the congregation, the children of Israel, who were weeping before the door of the tabernacle, the congregation. So think about this. There are people that are crying out, weeping over what's going on, what's taking place. And Moses is there, and this man is running with this other woman who he's not supposed to be with, committing horrible acts. What's to be done? And when Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, saw it, he rose up from among the congregation, and he took a javelin in his hand, and he went after the man of Israel in the tent. And he thrust both them through, the man of Israel and the woman, through her belly. So the plague was stayed from the children of Israel. Psalms 106 says, in verse 29, it speaks about what happened here, and it says, the plague broke out among them. Then Phinehas stood between God and the people, and the plague was stayed. So what Phinehas did was, in this sense, yes, was he an intercessor in a way? Yes, because he stood between here. He did something that no one else was going to do. And we look and we say, well, he killed a man and a woman. But again, the representation of what he was doing was standing against the wickedness that they had put on full display for everyone to see. And he said, it's not happening. Not on my watch. He was zealous for God's righteousness. So what am I saying? Am I saying that you go out with a spear and you go and you find people sinning and things? No, it's not that. But the question is does it bother you when you see what's taking place in this country? I saw several statistics showing some of the big changes here in America. One poll showed that 40% of Americans believe that there's going to be a civil war within 5 years. Almost half of this country believe there's going to be a civil war. I don't want that to take place. I mean, I'm not praying for that. I'm praying for righteousness, for holiness, for reviving. 65% of Americans don't approve when the Supreme Court turned down Roe versus Wade. That means the vast majority of Americans actually want to keep abortion and have far more access for babies being murdered. They don't care. baby boomers, 2% of baby boomers identify as LGBTQ plus, whatever you want to say. 2%. In my generation, 10% identify. And the next generation, Gen Z, 20%. 20%. Now, how is that? All of a sudden, with every single, that means by 2050, every single person will identify as gay. Is that how it's supposed to be? Is this what, there's something changing, something that is snowballing in this society. And we see it. And sometimes we want to hold away. We want to just take our eyes off of that, not pay attention to it. Since 2020, the Army has doubled in the amount of transgender soldiers that they have. Going in, hey, I would like this surgery, I want this, and that's your taxpayer dollars. There's a big change. The United Methodist Church, one of the largest Protestant denominations, voted this year to approve LGBT clergy and approve same-sex weddings in their churches. And now also, we've had the lowest birth rate in this country ever. People just don't care anymore. And some say, well, what's the point? Well, I want to live life for myself. There is a change in this country, and it's rapidly changing. And unless we realize that we are to be ones to seek to stand in the gap, not to sit idly by and to watch it unfold and do nothing. And I'm not calling for violence, but I am saying there ought to be a righteous zeal and a desire to live a life of integrity and to stand in the gap. All that's taken place, God is searching for ones that would simply be faithful walking with Him, be faithful in interceding for others, be faithful in standing up for righteousness. One of the saddest passages that I find in Ezekiel, in chapter 22 and verse 30, God said, I looked for someone among you who would stand in the gap. God searched and looked for somebody who was righteous, who would stand in the gap, he said, and what he said was, who would stand in the gaps of the walls and defend the land. But I couldn't find a single person, not a single one. I looked for someone who would stand for righteousness, and I couldn't find it. God even tells Jeremiah in Jeremiah 5:1, he says, run, look around the streets of Jerusalem, seek in the broad places, see if you can find anyone that executes judgment, that seeks truth. Look around, see if you can find anyone that cares for righteousness, that cares for holiness, that cares for living right, doing the right things. Look and see if you can find. It was a sad testament to the state of Israel. But I think about also in our own hearts and lives. We need to be faithful. We're called to be faithful. I think about Elijah. We don't have time to turn there, but Elijah, he had a great victory. At one point where he had the prophets of Baal line up, they put their altar up. They cried out to Baal for Baal to cast fire down on the altar. Nothing happened. Then the prophets began to cut themselves. The priests of Baal began to cut themselves, saying, we're devoted to you, Baal. We're going to cut ourselves and show you how much we're devoted. Nothing happened. And Elijah, what did he do? He had the altar where they actually poured water over the wood, water over the offering to show the power of God. He prays unto God, and immediately fire comes down and consumes the altar. people realized that they had been living in wickedness, and they followed Elijah. And Elijah led them to kill all the priests of Baal. But what happened? Well, Jezebel found out about it, Queen Jezebel. And she basically made a threat to Elijah. She said, I'll kill you. I'm coming after you. And Elijah does something very interesting. After that great victory, he runs away. He runs away. Now, there's a lot that takes place during that time when he goes to Mount Horeb. God reveals himself, but God shows Elijah that he is working even in the small things, and that you may not see it. But what is interesting is Elijah's at a place where he says, I'm done, God. I just want to die. I did what I could do. I'm done. And then he says, God asks Elijah later on, he says, why are you here? Elijah says, I'm the only one. I'm the only one that cares. I'm the only one that's trying to do anything. And God says, no. There's 7,000 that have not bowed their knee to Baal that are following me. You don't know it. You may not see it. And why do I say this? Again, we need to understand we ought to live a life of integrity. If you are the only one, but I tell you this, you're not. And sometimes you can wonder, oh, I guess it's just me. No one else cares. No one else. Listen, God's working. You just need to be faithful. And we see all that's going on in this world, but simply be faithful because it's not in vain. God knows it doesn't take him by surprise. But we're going to stand accountable whether we're going to be a faithful intercessor, whether we're going to have a zeal for righteousness and stand up when no one else will, and whether we're going to walk with God faithfully when the whole world is against him. Well, let's pray this morning.